Hey, Dog Nation, I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by our friends at Merriweather and Tharp. Busy show for us. It's Terrence Edwards coming up. We'll preview Georgia-Tennessee with him. We'll also talk to Brad Nessler, the guy that will call the game as a part of CBS Sports coverage at 3:30 on Saturday, and a lot on the Dogs and Vols in between. Could not do it, though, if you weren't here, so thanks for being a part of everything we're doing today. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You know, Kirby Smart's been saying a lot of things here this week about Georgia and Tennessee, and frankly, I'm not quite so sure how all of this lands with Georgia fans necessarily. I have a tendency to think that, last week Kirby Smart talked a lot about, coach speak and what coaches say prior to the start of a game. I have a tendency to think that maybe some of what's being said prior to the start of this game this upcoming week may be a little bit of, at least in the minds of some fans, it may appear to be coach speak. I would caution you to be a little bit careful to assume too much of that too soon. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Kirby Smart yesterday, a part of the SEC coaches teleconference, was speaking about Tennessee again, the opponent for this upcoming Saturday, and once again kind of says something there that's a little bit similar to some of the stuff that he said already this week. A lot of respect for the Vols, according to Kirby Smart, even in comparison to the team that Georgia played last Saturday, Auburn, which was, at least on paper, a top 10 matchup. Let me read this to you. This is from the SEC coaches teleconference yesterday. Kirby Smart says, "This is our biggest test." He means thus far this season. "I don't think we've played someone as good as these guys, especially the up-front guys." That's Kirby Smart, and Georgia fans hear that. Maybe some of them say, "Oh, come on, Kirby, this is still Tennessee. Georgia's been beating Tennessee now for years. Georgia's a 2-touchdown favorite in this game on Saturday. Let's not get out of control. Let's not get too crazy saying too much about Tennessee here coming up this week." And I kind of understand where Georgia fans are coming from that. I do think there's some numbers, though, to back up some of the stuff that Kirby is saying when it comes to the up-front guys for Tennessee. Jeremy Pruitt teams typically have good defenses, but let's focus on the offensive side of the ball for a moment, because if you look at what Tennessee's done running the football, that's usually a pretty good indication of how your offensive line is playing. The numbers through 2 games against only SEC competition, even if it's some of the lesser teams in the SEC, but against only SEC competition, numbers for Tennessee have been pretty good in that regard thus far. 182.5 yards on the ground on average over the course of the last couple of games. That puts Tennessee second in the SEC right now. Vols averaging 4.35 yards per carry. That's good enough for 4th in the SEC right now for Tennessee. Maybe those aren't eye-popping numbers, but it's certainly an improvement on where Tennessee has been. And when you think about what typically is a recipe for pulling an upset in college football, running game, especially against Georgia, that's usually a huge component of that. I think you've got to be a little bit aware of that. The other number that kind of jumps out to me about Tennessee a little bit is they've had 12 runs already this season of 10 or more yards. By comparison, Georgia just has 7 thus far this season. So when it comes to kind of at least some version of an explosive run, Tennessee's been a little bit better at that than maybe you kind of think of in the past. I don't think Tennessee comes in on Saturday and pulls this upset over Georgia. I don't think the Vols are ready to do that. But when Kirby Smart says this is a stiffer test for us, a tougher challenge for us than Auburn was the week before, there is a degree to which I kind of take Kirby at his word on that. And zeroing in on the offensive line, which we kind of mentioned before, when Smart spoke to reporters on Tuesday, he once again kind of reiterated the respect that he has for this collection of offensive linemen. Obviously, there's one big name that you know here, But Mays himself is not the only guy who can play for this Tennessee offensive line. Let me let you hear Kirby Smart talking about that going back to earlier this week.
We got a tremendous offensive line, probably one of the best in our league. Them, us. I like our offensive line good. I know Alabama's got a really good one, several others, but these guys are talented. And, CADE's played in our league at tackle position. He's proven he can block the best guys in the country. So has London. So they'll be really a great challenge they present us.
So once again, there is a way in which you can hear Kirby Smart talk there, and I do think that you kind of find yourself wanting to take it just a little bit seriously. That Cade Mays is a guy that has played a good bit of snaps for Georgia. It's one of the reasons why Tennessee wanted him so bad. It's one of the reasons why the Vols felt really good about being able to put him in the offensive line. There's some numbers from last week, and I gave these to you a little earlier this week. Some numbers from last week for Mays that suggest he didn't play very well against Missouri, but I don't expect that to continue. I'm sure that Mays is a pretty good player. As Kirby said, Wanya Morris is a pretty good player, too. That's a guy that was an elite recruit. This is something that Jeremy Pruitt's done at Tennessee in recent seasons that previous Tennessee coaches kind of weren't doing. And there are other guys, Kennedy has, played some snaps. He's been around prior to coming here, and, Pruitt's done some good things recruiting along the offensive line. I kind of respect that group a little bit. Certainly on paper, the results kind of speak to that. And when Kirby Smart says he respects them, I take him at his word on that. And here's what I'll say to Georgia fans. Even if you kind of find yourself saying, I still don't believe this, BA, you're just trying to be a Vince Dooley or a Larry Munson, you're just trying to talk up the opponent, I'm not buying what you're saying. I respect Kirby Smart, but I'm not buying what he's saying either when he talks up these Tennessee lines of scrimmage. Look, I obviously understand where you're coming from. Georgia's a big favorite in this game for a reason. But here's the other thing I'll kind of point out with all of this, that the possible belief that this could be true, that, hey, maybe Tennessee is improved. Maybe they are one of the more physical teams in the SEC. Certainly by comparison, I would say they look a little bit more physical than Florida has. Florida's, done some good things through the air thus far, but Florida's also been kind of pushed around a little bit from time to time. Tennessee's not really getting pushed around in much the same way. So if you would at least consider the possibility that this could be true, that Tennessee is improved along the lines of scrimmages, that the 2-0 start's not all smoke and mirrors, it's not all a mirage. If you'll at least consider the possibility that could be true, then I think something kind of interesting happens here. I think the presence of an improved Tennessee comes maybe at the right time for Georgia. Kirby Smart's notion of, and we know this is true, when Smart speaks these things, the SEC teleconference, this is a tough test for us. When Smart goes to his weekly press conference that we played audio of earlier in this week saying, we think in a lot of ways Tennessee's better than Auburn. Kirby Smart's not saying that to me, and he's not saying that to any other media person. He's not saying that to you. I think in a lot of ways Kirby Smart uses that platform, that microphone, that opportunity to speak. I think he's trying to address his own player. And I think that's where this gets really interesting on Saturday. That the possibility that Tennessee really is improved all of a sudden becomes the source of motivation that Georgia needs to take its level of play up a notch after having been in a rivalry game last week against Auburn, and the possibility, even the slightest temptation that you might want to look ahead to Alabama the following week, even the slightest temptation of doing that. No, you're not doing that because Kirby Smart says Tennessee's better. Kirby Smart says Tennessee's tough along the offensive line. Kirby Smart is praising this Tennessee offensive line every time he gets a chance to speak. I can promise you this. Georgia players are noticing that. And Georgia players maybe are just a little bit more willing to just sort of buy into whatever Kirby says. They're not going to be skeptical like the average fan is. If a Georgia player hears this about Tennessee, then I would say that if it's Smart who's saying it, the Georgia players themselves are kind of likely to believe it. And they are likely to use it as a source of motivation. I want to give you an example of this. I thought that Trey Hill, the Georgia center, said something really interesting this week. Hill was asked about all this talk with the Tennessee offensive line, and the reporter who asked it didn't say this, but he could have said, some of this is even coming from your own coach. All of this talk with the Tennessee offensive line right now. Do you guys get bothered by it? And does that motivate you to want to go out and make sure you show yourself to be the best offensive line in the game coming up on Saturday? I thought Trey Hill gave a very good answer. Listen to this.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, we feel like that every week. We just got a chip on our shoulder. That just get us going each and every week for people to notice us and talk about us. And that's that drive that we need each and every week to show people why we the best O-line.
So let me sum all this up. I don't think it's just coach speak when Kirby Smart says he's grown to respect the lines of scrimmage that Tennessee has. I do think Jeremy Pruitt has probably improved the team there in that regard. And to an extent, you should take that seriously heading into Saturday. But also be wary of this as a source of motivation. For a Georgia team that's got to reach down and find something deep every single Saturday, that's a chance to do that. Trey Hill says, we've got a chip on our shoulder because we've heard so much about the Tennessee offensive line. Boy, I think that's fun to think about. And that group with extra motivation to come out and make sure they're pushing and shoving, make sure they're opening holes, to make sure the five guys that get talked about on Saturday are not, Cade Mays and his buddies, but Trey Hill and his buddies. That battle in the trenches is probably going to be pretty fun to watch here coming up this weekend. let's hold off on banjo for right now. Let me address our audience and let you know that it's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by our friends at Merriweather and Tharp. And I want to kind of break with typical protocol here for a moment. We'll go around the doghouse before we're done. I promise that, because there's a couple of other good numbers that I want to get to when it comes to the Georgia-Tennessee game coming up on Saturday. And I don't want to give short shrift to that. Is that how you say that phrase? Short shrift? I don't want to give short shrift to what I want to do when we go around the doghouse a little bit later on. So let me push pause on that for right now and tell you that we've got a couple of very good guests coming up on today's show. One of those guests we will speak to in just a moment. That's former Georgia wide receiver Terrence Edwards. Terrence going to have some good stuff to say to us about previewing Tennessee coming up this weekend. I can't wait to do that. But very special guest, as promised today, the guy that will call the game as a part of CBS at 3:30 on Saturday. It is Brad Nessler. Let's get ready to welcome him in to DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp right now. And we will say hello to Brad Nessler here, calling the game for CBS on Saturday. A lot of Georgia fans have been excited about being back on the big network again on Saturday, and they get a chance to do that against Tennessee here this weekend. So we will look forward to welcoming in Brad Nessler to the program right now. Brad, welcome into the show, and we certainly appreciate you spending a couple of minutes with us here today.
Hey, Brandon, good to be with you, and looking forward to the game on Saturday. Should be fun.
So let me start with this. One of the things that Kirby Smart has said, I think somewhat interestingly this week, is a couple of times he's kind of made the comparison between Tennessee, the team that he plays on Saturday, Auburn, the team that Georgia played last week, and it certainly sounds like that Kirby sees some things that he likes about these Tennessee lines of scrimmage that maybe Auburn did not provide. What have you made of that comparison for Kirby Smart? And I guess how real do you think that the emergence of these, Tennessee offensive and defensive line is ahead of this game coming up on Saturday?
I think we'll find out a lot on Saturday. I think, right now you look at Tennessee and you think, 2-0 and 6 games last year and 8-game winning streak, and that's great. And it's great for Tennessee, and it's great for the Volunteer Nation, but I'm not sure they've beaten anybody of note. If they beat Georgia, then I'm going to say, wow, you know what? Their 2 lines of scrimmage were really, really good. I don't see them running for 230 yards on the ground against Georgia like they did against Missouri. If that happens, then it's the real deal. I mean, I think they are experienced on both sides. When Jeremy got there, the big thing was we got to get bigger, we got to get stronger, and that's how you kind of build a team in the SEC. If you can have a defensive front and an offensive line that's notable, that's how you're going to win games, no matter how good your skill position players are. So, yes, they're better. I think they're better than Auburn. A year ago, Auburn's defensive front was as good as anybody's in the country, if not as good as some NFL teams, and they're not that anymore. So they got pushed around by Georgia, and I always kind of have to wait to see, the eye test. I'll test it on Saturday, and I'll let you know. But they're better. They're better, and they're probably better than Auburn on both sides of the scrimmage, yeah.
I know that you spend your offseason doing like the rest of us do, kind of imagining some of the games that you'll be calling and what will be happening in those games. I know you know the Georgia story here pretty well, and in anticipating doing some Georgia games around this time of year, I'm guessing you probably didn't think Stetson Bennett would be the quarterback who was playing the majority of those snaps. You love a good storyline, though, as much as anybody. What have you made of Bennett kind of coming out of nowhere and really giving Georgia a level of quarterback play that I think he would probably be in trouble if it didn't have right now?
Oh, no doubt. And, he's Stetson Bennett the 4th for a reason. He was 4th on the depth chart, if not 5th. You know that more than anybody does. But I love it. I think it's great. I like underdogs doing well. I think it's, kind of like a, 5'10" point guard in basketball, that can shoot. And this guy can distribute, and he's doing a great job. I can't wait to talk to him. I haven't before because he wasn't on our radar, in past, we, every time we did a Georgia game, we talked to Jake, and so on and so forth. And I totally anticipated talking to Jamie Newman or JT Daniels or whoever, but I didn't think I'd be talking to Stetson Bennett this week, and I can't wait. It's an awesome story. If he can keep it up, it's going to even get better. And we'll find out in the next couple weeks because, if you beat Tennessee at home, and you're 3-0, you're going to be still number 3 in the country, and then you're going to Tuscaloosa next week. And if Alabama doesn't lose, it's going to be 2 against 3 or whatever, and it's going to be one of those games of the year, if not game of the century type thing. So, the weight on his shoulders is going to get a little bit bigger every week, but so far he's handling it, and it doesn't seem to faze him at all.
I won't ask you to reveal any of the private conversations you've had with Georgia players and coaches because I know you want to respect those relationships, and yet if I'm a broadcaster last week, I think I go into the Georgia-Auburn game assuming that I might be talking about multiple quarterbacks, and based on the way that Bennett played last week, I guess I don't feel that way anymore. My assumption is that this game belongs to Bennett on Saturday. In your pregame prep, are you still making room for the idea that Georgia could play either, Dwan Mathis a little bit or JT Daniels off the bench, or are you approaching your preparation as if Stetson Bennett's the only quarterback that's going to play on Saturday?
That's a great question because I have my folders right in front of me, the same kind of thing I've done for 40 years or whatever. I'm like old school. And I have a little bit of prep on JT Daniels. I don't have anything else on there. I have all Stetson Bennett and all George Pickens and KEARIS Jackson and Demetrius Robertson and down the list. I don't have a lot of backup. So if somebody else comes in, I'm just going to look at Gary and go ahead, Gary, keep talking. You're good. So no, I'm a Stetson Bennett guy right now, and I'm living it that way and see what happens, and I just hope it keeps going well for him.
Well, based on the way that he played last week, I think that level of preparation makes a lot of sense. Let me finish with this, and obviously if you're a Georgia coach and player, you can't look ahead, but we have the luxury of looking ahead a little bit. You mentioned that next Saturday, assuming Georgia takes care of its business against the Vols, sets up to be one of these kind of games of the year type thing, prime time there for Georgia and Alabama. Would you mind just giving me a little bit of an early preview of how you think that sets up? It's obviously a very good Georgia defense right now, maybe trying to keep pace with what's been a high-powered Alabama offense. Do you need to see the Tennessee game on Saturday to know if Georgia's ready for that test, or do you feel like the game next Saturday will live up to what is some of the early hype around it?
I think I have to see Saturday. I wasn't impressed in week one, neither were the Georgia fans with how they played. Last week, I was like, wow. I watched the whole game on my way home from Tuscaloosa, and I couldn't believe how good their Georgia's defense was. I mean, I knew it last year, but they got deeper and they got better. And, when you prepare and you look down and you go, well, I'm going to have 11 guys here. I've got like 22 guys or more that Georgia runs through defensively, and they really don't lose anything when they put one guy in for another. So I knew their defense was going to be supreme. It is. And they stop Mac Jones and his three receivers and Najee Harris, and I don't know. But if they shut Tennessee down, and, Tennessee ran all over Missouri, but I don't see them running all over Georgia at 230 yards on the ground. If that happens, then there's some dents in Georgia's defense. If they, shut down Tennessee like they did Auburn, then I think there's a really good chance that it's not going to be a high-scoring game in Alabama. I think it'll be a rock fight, basically.
Well, Brad, we certainly appreciate your thoughts on both those games. We're looking forward to the call on CBS on Saturday. I guess bring your raincoat. I guess there's still some worry about the rain there. But nonetheless, we'll be looking forward to having you back in the Classic City on Saturday and looking forward to another great call on CBS. And thanks for your time here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp here today.
You got it, Brandon. Great talking to you.
Good stuff there from Brad Nessler from CBS. Excellent job. I love the CBS call, man. We talked about this yesterday during the video. I love the music. I just love the whole thing. And when you got like Brad, he's like lived in Atlanta for a long time, and when you're geographically close to the league that you're covering, you just have a little bit more of an appreciation for it. You understand the storylines. You get all of that. That's certainly something that Brad Nessler provides for CBS, and it's a cool thing to be able to have him on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Now, let me take care of some business. I apologize for kind of going out of order here a little bit, but sometimes you have to accommodate guest schedules and things like that, so we did that a little bit there. Here is what's still to come. Terrence Edwards will be with us coming up in a few minutes. We will get him knocked out. I also want to go back a little bit, do around the doghouse, and there's more about the Georgia-Tennessee game I want to kind of say as a setup for all of this. There's some stuff we've got to do in looking ahead to the upcoming weekend in the SEC. There's already been one game moved. We talked about that a little bit yesterday between LSU and Missouri. There is at least the potential of another game moving, and by the time you hear this show, maybe there's more of this out there than I was able to report here live on this Thursday morning. So there is just a lot of business for us to take care of. Also, before we're done, a very cool description of the Georgia offense from a Georgia player. It's just that kind of day here around DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We are loaded up. Glad to have you with us. After Brad and Nessler, kind of a good way to get things going. And let's hit that banjo and keep rolling with the show for right now. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, also radio and streaming video show. Good to have you with us on the program today, no matter how you get to us today. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, radio and Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rev, and as a podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We just really appreciate you being with us, and we appreciate our friends at Meriwether and Tharp for making it possible. You know, one of the things that I have been around now long enough to do, we've been talking about Meriwether and Tharp for long enough, that this is a possibility, is I have heard from some of you about the relationship that you've had with Meriwether and Tharp, and boy, it fills me with a great sense of pride to be able to make a recommendation and a referral. And really what I do on the air is no different than a referral you would make on your own social media with one of your own friends. When someone is in need of a business or a company, you want to give them a good answer to that question. So what I do with Meriwether and Tharp is really no different than any kind of referral that anyone would make in kind of a personal walk of life. And when you tell someone, hey, trust this company, you want to make sure that on the other end of that, they really do feel like they were well taken care of. And I have heard from some of you when it comes to Meriwether and Tharp. Divorce can be a scary situation, but let's face it, some of you either have gone through that or will go through that. And unfortunately for some of you, you are in the midst of going through that right now. That's obviously tough, but what makes it better and what makes the process of reconciliation easier is when you have a strong advocate on your side, someone who knows the intricacies of the law, someone who's willing to fight to give you what's yours and make you whole again. And that's what you can trust my friends at Meriwether and Tharp to be able to do. They are your source for Georgia divorce. You can find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. That'll get you in touch with Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. I saw Bob Tharp from Meriwether and Tharp in Athens on Saturday. Bob's a huge UGA fan. He and his entire family love going to these games in Athens. So it's kind of nice to sort of do business with a good group of UGA fans. But also it's just really important to have a strong advocate on your side. That's what Meriwether and Tharp provides. They're your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. All right, let me shift gears here now, and let's go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Marco's Pizza. I will tell you, for our podcast radio audience, coming up in just a moment, we'll hear from Brad Nessler from CBS Sports. Later on today, it's Terrence Edwards, the former Georgia wide receiver. So we're fully loaded with guests on program today. Terrence will provide a big preview for Saturday, and, of course, his appearance on the Dog Nation post-game show. He'll talk about that. Brad, a great voice here calling the action for CBS. We'll hear from him on today's show. The video audience ought to get a chance to hear this, but radio and podcast, you'll get a chance to hear this coming up. Before any of that, though, as we go around the doghouse delivered by Marco's Pizza, I do want to address more about Georgia and Tennessee on Saturday. And I want to try to see if I can make this relevant, and hopefully I get the job done on this. I think there is a degree to which that Georgia does have something to prove on Saturday. And I want to use some gambling odds to try to explain this. Now, I give the kind of I guess precursor to all of this, the warning on this, because I know that some of you don't care about gambling. You know, Georgia covering the spread, that doesn't matter to you. You only want to see Georgia win. Whatever happens in Las Vegas or the online sports book is uninteresting to you, and I totally get that. The reason why I bring this up, though, is that when you hear about gambling odds, the thing that you should hear and understand is this is simply an expectation about how a game is supposed to play out. And if a team covers the spread, that means they have exceeded the expectations for that game. If a team fails to cover the spread, even if they win, they may not have performed well in comparison to expectations. And that does matter, because how well you dominate one Power 5 level opponent can be quite a predictor for how well you will do against another Power 5 opponent. So whether you bet or not, whether you care about point spreads or not, the point spread as an expectation for performance does have incredible value for really determining and understanding how good a team is. With that in mind, Georgia in these kinds of games the last couple of years has kind of left something to be desired. Georgia is about a 13-point favorite or so against Tennessee on Saturday. That line's been dropping a little bit, but Georgia's about a 13 or so point favorite. That means at home they are expected to win by at least double digits. But last year, in the same kind of situation, when Georgia was favored by double digits at home, those games more often than not ended up being closer than they were supposed to be. Georgia is just 1 in 4 in its last 5 games at home as a double-digit favorite against the spread. And you can think about this in your own mind. The Texas A&M game last year was closer than it was supposed to be. The Kentucky game last year was closer than it was supposed to be. The Notre Dame game last year was closer than it's supposed to be. These were all games which Georgia was supposed to win pretty easily, and the game itself ended up not quite being as easy for Georgia as the expectations going in were supposed to be. In 2018, Georgia was better in this situation. They were 3-1 against the spread as a double-digit home favorite. But the one game in which Georgia did not cover, you guessed it, Tennessee in Jeremy Pruitt's first year. Georgia was a 30.5-point favorite, but just won the game 38-12. Now, what does all that mean? It means that even though Tennessee is itself not a national championship contender, Georgia's status as a national championship contender can be validated by how well it performs compared to expectations against Tennessee on Saturday. If Georgia can take what the experts say is supposed to be an easy game and make it look easy, despite the fact that Kirby Smart, as I said earlier, seems to have some pretty, justified respect for the Tennessee lines of scrimmage and possibly the Tennessee offensive line, the Tennessee running game, if Georgia can still find a way to make this game easy on Saturday, then if you're looking for the evidence that you need that Georgia's ready to compete in a place like Tuscaloosa, then you may get what you need there. Sometimes we get fixated on who a team is playing and so-and-so hasn't played anybody, and if Georgia wins on Saturday, a lot of other SEC fans may say, well, it doesn't matter what you did against Tennessee because who is Tennessee? You worry about, too much about who you play. But how you play also matters. And if you're a Georgia fan wanting to know where your team ranks amongst the top national championship contenders after the end of this week, Georgia going out and handling its business by 2 touchdowns or more, handling this business, making it look somewhat easy, that's something that Georgia didn't do a ton a year ago. And if you want to feel better about Georgia now than maybe you did a year ago, the result on Saturday could go a long way towards getting that done. It's around the Dawghouse. It's delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza. Marco's is America's most beloved pizza. It's real, authentic pizza made the Italian way. And while it tastes good, and I love that, something else that my family also appreciates, the fact that with 2 young kids and hungry mouths and things along those lines, Marco's Pizza also is great value for us as well. It just matters. You want good food, but you want it to come at a great price, and Marco's Pizza can certainly do that for you. Let me give you an example. Right now you can get 1-topping pizza, a large 1-topping pizza with 10 wings or 10 dippers for just $17.99. That's a DawgNation Game Day favorite. You can get yours delivery or carry out through the Marco's app, or you can find them online at marcos.com. That's marcos.com for more details about that. And it's around the Dawghouse here, delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza. All right, we have got a lot to do on today's show. We are as busy as anyone could be. We're going to get Terrence Edwards later on, the former Georgia wide receiver. But for now, for radio and podcast, hope you can enjoy getting a chance to speak to the guy that'll call the game on Saturday for CBS. Let's talk to Brad Nessler right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. All right, and on video. So I promise we got R.S. Andrews coming up later on. We got some more content to get to as well. We've just got a lot to unpack for today's show. So let us do this. Why don't we go ahead and get Terrence Edwards on the phone? We'll get ready to talk to him. And then after that, we'll do SEC through. I've got a really fun piece of audio I want to play for you from Demetrius Roberts. And this whole show's a little bit out of order compared to the way we might normally do it, but I think we're still having a good time. I hope you are anyway. And we'll kind of, stitch it back together for the radio, for the podcast. So we'll do all of that. But want to cover some ground with Terrence Edwards. If you're just joining us on video, you missed a really good conversation a little earlier with Brad Nessler. So we just got a lot going on. We're taking care of a lot of business, covering a lot in relationship to Georgia and Tennessee coming up on Saturday, and we're glad to have you with us as we do all of that. And looking forward to Saturday. What's going to go down between the Dogs and the Vols, expecting that to be a really fun game. Is Terrence rock and roll ready to go? All right, I'm glad to have Terrence with us, glad to have you with us as well. So if you enjoyed Brad Nessler a little earlier, you'll certainly love a chance to hear from Terrence Edwards right now. He's a part of our DawgNation post-game show. We welcome him in as well here to DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's say hello to Terrence Edwards right now. Of course, you can hear him as part of our DawgNation post-game show on Saturday. I'll be at the UGA bookstore. Terrence Edwards will be joining us on video, and he joins us right now here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp as well. Terrence, I know a lot of this we kind of talked about on Saturday, but as we head towards another game this upcoming weekend, let me go back a little bit. As a guy who caught a bunch of balls for Georgia, scored a bunch of touchdowns, and only receiver in UGA history to ever surpass 1,000 yards in the season, the guy that delivers the football to you matters. And so as someone who likes catching footballs, how did you feel about the way that Stetson Bennett threw it on this past Saturday? How impressed were you with what he did in his debut as a Georgia starter?
I was very impressed. I saw some stats later on that he has a very high completion rate on third down, and that's the down that really matters. So he's getting it done when the pressure is the most, is trying to keep your offensive team on the field and keep those chains moving. So he's played very well, under control, and hopefully he's the same way this week against a big game versus Tennessee.
Would you agree with me on this, that, if you look at what Bennett did a week ago, I'm not going to lie to you, at the beginning of the offseason, I thought that Jamie Newman was going to be Georgia's starting quarterback, and then after Newman opted out, I guess I probably assumed it was going to be JT Daniels. Had Newman or Daniels, two guys that have more experience than Bennett, had Newman or Daniels played this game this past Saturday, had they played the second half against Arkansas and put up the numbers that Bennett put up, I wouldn't have really asked me very many questions about that. I would just assume that these were, high-level starters in the SEC playing really well. That really right now, Bennett is playing about as well as I would have assumed that Newman would have played for Georgia. And had Daniels been the guy in this spot, Bennett's playing about as well as I would assume that Daniels was too. I mean, all of this right now is kind of adding up to the tune of, a quarterbacking performance in Bennett. Even if this is not the guy we thought it would be, I think he's playing about as well as you could have hoped a Georgia quarterback would. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree. I think if this was JT Daniels or Jamie Newman playing the way that Stetson is playing right now, the Georgia fan base would be elated. It wouldn't be any questions about who's going to be the quarterback for the next week. So he is playing as well as I hope any of the Georgia quarterbacks could have played under the circumstance that they were putting in this year with no spring practice, with only Zoom meetings, so really couldn't get together with their teammates. So Stetson is playing as well as I expected the other two guys who have played a lot of college football to play.
Let me move on here and talk about one of the receivers because, listen, people know I'm a big fan of George Pickens. I love the incoming freshmen, the guys who are kind of getting going here, like Jermaine Burton, Marcus Rosemary-Jackson. Looking forward to seeing Justin Robinson, get more opportunities as the season goes along. But we also knew when Dominic Blaylock went down with injury that Georgia was going to need a contribution from one of its veteran guys, that you had to have someone who had been playing really step up. And I think thus far, KEARIS Jackson's really done that. You got a sense from Jackson before the season began that he was pretty comfortable in the Todd Monken offense, and maybe he felt like that Monken offense was going to highlight his skill set pretty well. I think that's kind of turned out to be true. How valuable would you say what KEARIS Jackson did for Georgia this past weekend was?
But yeah, as I come on and I keep naming these guys' names, his name kept coming up in my mind, and I kept saying that we need another guy, a veteran guy. We knew that Jermaine was talented. We knew Justin Robinson and Marcus Roseman. We knew those young guys was talented, but they are young guys, and we need a veteran guy to step up. And that guy had to be KEARIS Jackson or Demetrius Robinson. I'm from Middle Georgia, so I'm a little biased, so I like those Middle Georgia players. And KEARIS is from Peach County in the heart of Middle Georgia, from my neck of the woods, and they're just some football players there. My college roommate was Randy McMichael, who's from Peach County, and I just know the type of talent that comes out of that small little town. So he is that guy, that the leader, the veteran, and he's out there. Now teams are gonna have to look at him. If not, they're going to continue to double and shade the safety over to George. KEARIS is going to be able to continue to do the thing he did this past Saturday.
Well, here's the other thing I think it's important about that, and you know a lot of the Georgia players and future Georgia players, and you know how challenging it is when a roster is as deep as Georgia's is right now, and the fans want every single recruit to play right away and get a bunch of touchdowns and get a lot of attention. And there is a degree to which, with Georgia being as talented as it is and as deep as it is, sometimes a little patience is required. And I think that for a lot of Georgia fans who had been hearing a lot of good things about KEARIS ever since he came out of Peach County, I think there was a sense of restlessness about, well, when's it going to come to pass? When's it going to kind of click for him? And people just get a little impatient. Maybe KEARIS himself could have gotten a little impatient over the course of time. But when you see a guy like this, as a veteran, now playing as well as he is, would you also agree that's a reminder that, patience is still important in giving these players a chance to kind of grow into their role, grow into their bodies, and eventually blossom after having been on campus for a little while, that finding a way to maintain that level of patience is still pretty important, right?
Oh, exactly. There's not going to be a lot of players to come in and just be an instant impact like George, like myself, who started my very first game on the when I played at Georgia. AJ Green, like, you're going to have sometimes the guys just going to have to develop a little bit and mature. And for KEARIS, I think he always had this, but unfortunately he got injured at the wrong time. Last year, I think he broke his hand when he had the opportunity to play in some games. So I think it's always been there for him, but unfortunately things happened that stopped him from being able to show this talent that he had. But now it's his time. He's the veteran. He's the guy that those young guys are going to lean on, and he's the voice, and he's got to continue to play like he did last week.
It is Terrence Edwards will be a part of our DawgNation post-game show coverage presented by the UGA Bookstore on Saturday. I'll tell you in a couple of minutes about a big autograph signing the bookstore is going to have this upcoming weekend, but let me also remind you, as you want to get stocked up for all your game day apparel, the stuff that I'm wearing right now, actually the shirt, the pullover, everything actually came from the UGA Bookstore. So if you're in Athens, stop by and see them. They're open 7 days a week there at the UGA Bookstore, or you can shop online, UGABookstore.com. They're going to take really good care of you. And whether you're home gating, tailgating, if you're tailgating, be careful. That's not in style this time of year, this particular year. But either way, you want to get stocked up for game day, the UGA Bookstore will take care of you for all of that. I got Terrence Edwards here. He'll be a part of that coverage coming up on Saturday. And Terrence, one of the big storylines going into the weekend is CADE Mays. He was at Georgia, now he's at Tennessee. How big of a deal do you think it is for these Georgia players to play against a player that they used to play alongside?
I think it's a big deal. I think, for not being there and really understanding what's going on, I mean, we could all speculate of why he left, but we don't know if we're not in that locker room. And I think the guys like CADE a lot, but I just think they're going to get an opportunity to play against me. I think they're going to relish the moment. He's still their brother once this game is over, but while this game is going on, they're going to try to attack him, and they understand his strengths and weaknesses from practicing against them every day, and they're going to try to exploit those weaknesses. So I think it's going to be a game that's going to be amped up for CADE himself and the guys that he's going to go against, and we're going to see what happens. But I think the guys are going to be pumped up to play again.
So let me ask you about this. I talked about this with somebody earlier this week, and I can't quite remember who, but Georgia-Tennessee used to be a very, very tough series for Georgia. And in your career, you kind of came along as this was shifting, right? I think, if I'm remembering correctly, your first year in Athens, maybe you guys lost to Tennessee, but you would have been a part of the first Georgia victory in that series in 2000. You would have played in the Hobnail Boot game in 2001. And, of course, in your final year at Georgia, you'd have gotten the victory there in 2002. So you kind of experienced the transformation, but you and I know your brother played in a ton of, big Georgia-Tennessee games. And by the way, don't even get me started on the 1995 game with your brother, who, Georgia could have absolutely won that game on that particular Saturday. I didn't like some of the tackles that the Tennessee players did on Robert. I felt like they were kind of going after that ankle a little bit, but not that I hold a grudge all these years later. But nonetheless, it's all part of what was the backstory of Georgia and Tennessee. Would you mind reminding folks kind of, if Georgia is lucky enough to win on Saturday, or not even lucky enough, if Georgia gets it done on Saturday, the fact that beating Tennessee ought to matter because of guys like yourself who kind of came along in a time in which Georgia was really trying to get back into this rivalry, if you want to go back years ago?
Exactly. For a while, before that, for the 2000 season, which I just saw on Facebook, BA, that somebody posted, that's been 20 years ago. Yeah. I was like, man, I'm getting old. That game was 20 years ago. That's kind of started the run for us. Like you said, I went 3-1 against Tennessee, but my brother went 0-4. So in the Peyton Manning years, we just, for a stretch there, we just couldn't beat them. And Coach Dunning started that in 2000. And now I think we kind of control this series. But, man, for the SEC to be good, we have to have Tennessee to be good. They don't have to beat us, but they have to be good. So just make the SEC East a very competitive league. And I think Jeremy Pruitt has done a great job of getting talent in there. You can see it just developing over the last few years, and I think he's on the cusp. I think we're still depth-wise a little bit better than Tennessee, but I anticipate it's going to be a good game on Saturday with Georgia on top of course. But I give Tennessee kudos. They are, I think, on the rise to be back to what they used to be in the past.
And I'm right about this, right? Some of those tackles in your brother in 1995, they're a little dirty, right?
Exactly. He was on his way to another probably 5-touchdown game with 156 yards and 2 touchdowns in 2 quarters. So he was on his way to another spectacular game.
Yeah, listen, after all these years, I still hold grudges every now and then. Terrence, I love talking Georgia football with you. Can't wait to do it this upcoming Saturday for the Dog Nation post-game show presented by the UGA Bookstore. By the way, let me also remind folks of this. Speaking of the UGA Bookstore, before the game between the Dogs and Vols on Saturday, big autograph signing. The legendary former coach Vince Dooley, the man who the field is named after, he's going to be there. Also, Clint Bowling, great former Georgia offensive lineman, also former Cincinnati Bengal. He's going to be there as well. All of this leading up to the Dogs and the Vols. It's 1 to 3 p.m. Saturday at the UGA Bookstore. It's right there next to the Tate Center. You can get all the information that you need at UGABookstore.com. But come by and see Coach Dooley, see Clint Bowling before the game. I'll see you there at the UGA Bookstore after the game. It's a great chance to shop for some UGA apparel, but also just hang out with a bunch of really good UGA folks. Terrence, I'll also see you through video on Saturday for our Dog Nation post-game show. I look forward to talking to you then.
All right, thanks for having me. See you Saturday.
Absolutely.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So busy day for us here on Dog Nation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll roll on now with our SEC Through, and let me also highlight what's coming up later on today on the Dog Nation video channels. If you haven't checked out yet, Dog Nation Happy Hour poured by Classic City Lager. Great day to do that today. Myself and John Stinchcomb, a little longer form discussion with John, looking at Dogs and Vols coming up on Saturday. That's 4 p.m. It airs live. Of course, you can watch it after the fact anytime you want to. But 4 p.m. live on the Dog Nation video channels, Facebook, YouTube, everything else. It's poured by our friends at Classic City Lager. And by the way, speaking of Classic City Lager, that's an Athens original. It's a taste of the Classic City, but you don't have to be in Athens to get it. Now, if you are in Athens, you want to go by the Snow Tire facility there in downtown or something like that, the tap room, and really enjoy yourself. That's a good thing to do this time of year around the city of Athens. But you don't have to be in Athens to enjoy Classic City Lager. It's available in 6, 12-pack cans, whatever retail